Well, then let's go for another round and start actually with something I said at the end of the last time. That whatever we are doing, basically it matters. Independent of how small it is, how irrelevant it seems to be at first glance. Now, of course, in today's times, it may well be just looking for comfort, not having any God that gives us meaning, not having any reference point that seems to be fixed, living in what Zygmunt Bauman called the liquid modernity. Now, there may be and will be some truth in it, but I think there's another important point that is even more relevant. It is the struggle we permanently face with the individual, with a single act, and establishing this link to the large unit of which we know vaguely that it exists, of which we know vaguely how it exists, but only vaguely. We know little details, but it is extremely difficult to grasp, to understand the entirety. Now, if we are honest, we face a similar difficulty or the same difficulty with the individual. We seem to know him or her, we seem to know ourselves, but in fact we know different facets, and we again have difficulties to understand the entirety of what may be called correctly personality. We have this difference between person and personality. The personality including this inner calling, ambition, being, existence. It's going beyond existence. We have had many times the discussion on exactly this in terms of what had been called the Lebensphilosophy, a German term, and it was a German thing, so there is no real translation. So we have this in terms of little tiny actions, activities, and the universe. And we have this as well in social terms. We have individuals, and we have always difficulties to define the link, to understand the link to society. Norbert Elias was great in this, saying there is actually no difference. There may be occasionally something like an analytical difference, but it is not more. This analytical difference is even something that has to be taken with care, because what in actual fact we have is an interaction, and this interaction is both at the same time it is social and it is individual. There is no possible distinction, because we are actually constituting the social by acting as individuals, as personalities, and vice versa. We are constituted immediately in this act of being influenced, if we want. So there is this difficulty to understand it, and there is at the same time this question if there is an inherent tendency to individualize now in terms of withdrawal, of retreating, of seeing ourselves actually as unique. And of course we are unique, but what I mean now is seeing ourselves as unique in terms of independence. independence, and in a way seeing ourselves as we are the only people who are critical about something. We are the only people who can really enjoy this. We are the only people who can understand something. Then there are, of course, if you want, the philosophical jokes that supposedly only one person understood Hegel, and this was Hegel himself, although it's not entirely clear if he understood what he was working on, what he was writing. So, in this sense, there is, of course, individuality and singularity, but is that something we can take for granted in terms of we have a right to individualize in terms of isolating us from others, as well in terms of we have a right not to take responsibility, but we can shift responsibility away and say this is out of our reach, this is out of our realm, and we would do things in a very different way. We would, of course, do things in a correct way. Of course we would. We all know it better. And at the same time, we do not recognize that our action as social action, as part of collective action, including part of a historical process, is so important as such. I think we have to argue more strongly in favor of making collectivity, this collective meaning, more consciousness, developing this awareness of whatever we do matters, including if we do not do anything, it matters as well. Of course, we need what I had been talking about, these retreats in history, if you want, to have a certain stabilized period in history, in societal, social history, but as well in our personal history, that we say, okay, we will try to settle here. We will make sense out of this. And we will make sense out of this in terms of accommodating ourselves within a certain environment. But then again, using these eras, these phases, these stages of settlement can only make sense if we are using it to move forward, to develop something that may be called critical awareness, that is about the energy we are in need of, to say this is the energy that allows us then, with this critical approach, to move forward and to resist. Of course, there are the large events in personal life, in history, where it seems to be obvious that we have to resist. The question then remains or comes up if this is only about resisting in something that is very obviously going wrong, that is very obvious to be important. History, being here in Łódź, brings automatically up the question of fascism and what les Boches, the Germans, did to this country. To the city as well, where there had been, I think, the largest ghetto, Jewish ghetto, that had been established by the fascists. I read recently something about it, that this ghetto was made unknown, at least in terms of what was going on in this ghetto. The tram going through it, the windows had been blackened so that nobody could watch out, could see what is going on outside. And it had been a really huge ghetto. If you go today through the city, you can see history, literally. You see I'm hesitating, you see the largeness of the smallness, the huge space that had been occupied by this narrow-minded anti-Jewish attitude. And it had been anti-Jewish, it had been anti-communist, it had been anti-socialist, it had been anti-homosexuals. It had been against everything, anti-everything that had not been Aryan. The Aryan against the alien. But what was it really about? Hannah Arendt was working on this, the Frankfurt School was working on this, and this is something we kind of lost the courage to do in many cases, looking at the banality of ever, as Hannah Arendt called it in her book on Eichmann. But it is not just the banality of ever, but it is the banality of things we do, having this huge effect. The banality of ever in the case of Eichmann had been about an official just doing his job and doing it well, being aware of the meaning of what happened, but at the same time saying, it's not me who is executing this ever. It is me who just fulfills whatever I have to fulfill in this job. It was about transport. Isn't that something? Not on this scale, but isn't that something we do in our daily lives, just doing our job, without thinking about the consequences, without thinking about the meaning? In a way, unconsciously doing something we actually do very consciously, namely doing our work well, whatever it is, be it working in a shop, be it working in an enterprise and building cars, computers, programming something, be it working in a university and teaching and doing research. And it is more and more that administrative requirements determine what we are actually doing. And this is the administrative presence in universities, in healthcare, in social provisions, but it is as well the administrative orientation of enterprises making profit for the enterprise without thinking what we are actually doing in terms of producing. We are producing indeed exchange values and use values. But how do they fit together, and where is the contradiction between them? This is something we do not think about, and we are not allowed to think about. And still, we have to think about it if we are working in a responsible way. Now, of course, we cannot do it. Usually, we cannot do it just on our own. And if we do it, it's basically our end. We lose the job in the best case. Well, in the best case, we may think in this way that bullying is much worse and ruins the health for the rest of the life. Or we may be just not thrown out of the job, but thrown out of the window, or we are being brought to throw ourselves out of the window. Individual cases, but at the same time, this is what is going on permanently. And then we come again to this point of research. This is what I'm talking about, and this is what I'm doing. Too often we just reproduce what we know already. We put new figures on it and are moaning how bad the world is, instead of looking really for fundamental ways that allow us getting out of the situation. Precarity, we are looking for getting back in the old system of dependent employment, but we are not thinking about, or not enough thinking about, real alternatives. Do we need it? What are alternatives in organizing this work? How can we redefine use value and exchange value? Do we actually need exchange value as such as we have it today? Questions, as I said, we cannot solve them individually. And unfortunately, we see that usually those who can do a little bit more there, can do something different in terms of an organized body, are, for whatever reasons, not ready, not able to do this. All this can be explained, is being explained. And there we have the same thing. We are explaining it, and we are not making the other step. So talking about, in this series about research and academic work, it has to come back again and again to what Karl Marx formulated in the 11th thesis of Feuerbach. I do not have the exact wording here, but it is not about interpreting the world in a different way, but it is to change it. This is the major thing of what can we really do, not to have success within the system, not to have the system itself succeeding, but to build up, even if it is about small steps, to build up a resistance that allows academic work to be meaningful. So, thank you very much. And of course, there we are. It is all about curiosity. Thank you.
De la fin du passé, faisons table rase, fous l'esclave debout, debout. Le monde va changer de base, nous ne sommes rien, soyons tous. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous, et demain, l'international sera le genre humain. Il n'est pas de sauveur suprême, ni Dieu, ni César, ni tribun. Travailleurs, sauvons-nous nous-mêmes, décrétons le salut commun. Pour que le voleur rende gorge, pour tirer l'esprit du cachot. Soufflons nous-mêmes notre forge, battons le fer quand il est chaud. C'est la lutte